Chapter 20. And so my relations with my employer were quiet and peaceful. But still, the unclean and degrading element, which I so dreaded on becoming a footman, was conspicuous and made itself felt every day. I did not get on with Polya. She was a well-fed and pampered hussy, who adored Orlov because he was a gentleman, and despised me because I was a footman, probably from the point of view of a real flunky or cook. She was fascinating, with her red cheeks, her turned-up nose, her coquettish glances, and the plumpness, one might almost say fatness, of her person. She powdered her face, colored her lips and eyebrows, laced herself in, and wore a bustle and a bangle made of coins. She walked with little ripping steps. As she walked, she swayed, or, as they say, wriggled her shoulders and back. The rustle of her skirts, the creaking of her stays, the jingle her bangle, and the vulgar smell of lip salve, toilet vinegar, and scent stolen from her master, aroused in me, whilst I was doing the rooms with her in the morning, a sensation as though I were taking part with her in some abomination. Either because I did not steal, as she did, or because I displayed no desire to become her lover, which she probably looked upon as an insult. Or perhaps because she felt that I was a man of a different order, she hated me from the first day. My inexperience, my appearance, so unlike a flunky, and my illness, seemed to her pitiful and excited her disgust. I had a bad cough at that time, and sometimes at night I prevented her from sleeping, as our rooms were only divided by a wooden partition. And every morning she said to me, "Again, you didn't let me sleep. We ought to be in hospital instead of in service." She so genuinely believed that I was hardly a human being, but something infinitely below her. That, like the Roman matrons who were not ashamed to bathe before their slaves, she sometimes went about in my presence in nothing but her chemise. Once when I was in a happy, dreamy mood, I asked her at dinner. We had soup and roast meat sent in from a restaurant every day. "Polya, do you believe in God?" "Why, of course." Then I went on, "You believe there will be a day of judgment, and that we shall have to answer to God for every evil action?" She gave me no reply, but simply made a contemptuous grimace. And looking at time at her cold eyes and overfed expression, I realized that for her complete and finished personality, no God, no conscience, no laws existed, and that if I had had to set fire to the house, to murder or to rob, I could not have hired a better accomplice. In my novel surroundings, I felt very uncomfortable for the first week at Orlov's, before I got used to being addressed as thou, and being constantly obliged to tell lies. Saying my master is not at home when he was. In my flunkey's swallowtail, I felt as though I were in armor, but I grew accustomed to it in time. Like a genuine footman, I waited at table, tidied the rooms, ran and drove about on errands of all sorts. When Orlov did not want to keep an appointment with Zinaida Fyodorovna, or when he forgot that he had promised to go and see her, I drove to Znamensky Street, put a letter into her hands, and told a lie. And the result of it all was quite different from what I had expected when I became a footman. Every day in this new life of mine was wasted for me and my cause, as Orlov never spoke of his father, nor did his visitors. And all I could learn of the statesman's doings was, as before, what I could glean from the newspapers or from correspondence with my comrades. The hundreds of notes and papers I used to find in the study and read had not the remotest connection with what I was looking for. Orlov was absolutely uninterested in his father's political work, and looked as though he had never heard of it, or as though his father had long been dead. Chapter 21. Every Thursday we have visitors. I ordered a piece of roast beef from the restaurant and telephoned to Elysius to send us caviar, cheese, oysters, and so on. I bought playing cards. Polya was busy all day getting ready the tea things and the dinner service. To tell the truth, this spurt of activity came as a pleasant change in our idle life. And Thursdays were for us the most interesting days. Only 3 visitors used to come. The most important, and perhaps the most interesting, was the one called Pekursky, a tall, lean man of 45, with a long hook nose, with a big black beard, and a bald patch on his head. His eyes were large and prominent, and his expression was grave and thoughtful, like that of a Greek philosopher. He was on the board of management of some railway, and also had some post in a bank. He was a consultant lawyer in some important government institution, and had business relations with a large number of private persons as a trustee, chairman of committees, and so on. He was of quite a low grade in the service, and modestly spoke of himself as a lawyer. But he had a vast influence. A note or a card from him was enough to make a celebrated doctor, a director of a railway, or a great dignitary. See anyone without waiting. And it was said that through his protection, one might obtain even a post of the 4th class and get any sort of unpleasant business hushed up. He was looked upon as a very intelligent man, but his was a strange, peculiar intelligence. He was able to multiply 213 by 373 in his head instantaneously, or turn English pounds into German marks without help of pencil or paper. He understood finance and railway business thoroughly. And the machinery of Russian administration had no secrets for him. He was a most skillful pleader in civil suits, and it was not easy to get the better of him at law, but that exceptional intelligence could not grasp many things which are understood even by some stupid people. For instance, he was absolutely unable to understand why people are depressed, why they weep, shoot themselves, and even kill others, why they fret about things that do not affect them personally, and why they laugh when they read Gogol or Schedrin. Everything abstract, everything belonging to the domain of thought and feeling, was to him boring and incomprehensible, like music to one who has no ear. He looked at people simply from the business point of view and divided them into competent and incompetent. No other classification existed for him. Honesty and rectitude were only signs of competence. Drinking, gambling, and debauchery were permissible, but must not be allowed to interfere with business. Believing in God was rather stupid, but religion ought be safeguarded, as the common people must have some principle to restrain them, otherwise they would not work. Punishment is only necessary as deterrent. There was no need to go away for holidays, as it was just as nice in town, and so on. He was a widower and had no children, but lived on a large scale, as though he had a family, and paid 3,000 rubles a year for his flat. The second visitor, Kukushkin, an actual civil councilor, though a young man, was short, and was conspicuous for his extremely unpleasant appearance, which was due to the disproportion between his fat, puffy body and his lean little face. His lips were puckered up suavely, and his little trimmed mustaches looked as though they had been fixed on with glue. He was a man with the manners of a lizard. He did not walk, but, as it were, crept along with tiny steps, squirming and sniggering. And when he laughed, he showed his teeth. He was a clerk on special commissions, and did nothing, though he received a good salary, especially in the summer, when special and lucrative jobs were found for him. He was a man of personal ambition, not only to the marrow of his bones, but more fundamentally to the last drop of his blood. But even in his ambitions, he was petty and did not rely on himself, but was building his career on the chance favor flung him by his superiors. For the sake of obtaining some foreign decoration, or for the sake of having his name mentioned in the newspapers, as having been present at some special service in the company of other great personages, he was ready to submit to any kind of humiliation, to beg, to flatter, to promise. He flattered Orlov and Pekarsky from cowardice, because he thought they were powerful. He flattered Pulya and me because we were in the service of a powerful man. Whenever I took off his fur coat, he tittered and asked me, "Stepan, are you married?" And then unseemly vulgarities followed by way of showing me special attention. Kukushkin flattered Orlov's weaknesses, humored his corrupted and blasé ways. To please him, He affected malicious raillery and atheism. In his company criticized persons before whom in other places he would slavishly grovel. When at supper they talked of love and women, he pretended to be a subtle and perverse voluptuary. As a rule, one may say, Petersburg rakes are fond of talking of their abnormal tastes. Some young actual civil counselor is perfectly satisfied with the embraces of his cook, or of some unhappy streetwalker on the Nevsky Prospect. But to listen to him, you would think he was contaminated by all the vices of East and West combined, that he was an honorary member of a dozen iniquitous secret societies and was already marked by the police. Kukushkin lied about himself in an unconscionable way, and they did not exactly disbelieve him, but paid little heed to his incredible stories. The third guest was Gruzin, the son of a worthy and learned general, a man of Orlov's age, with long hair, short set of eyes, and gold spectacles. I remember his long white fingers that looked like a pianist. And indeed, there was something of a musician, of a virtuoso, about his whole figure. The first violins and orchestras looked just like that. He used to cough, suffered from migraine, and seemed invalidish and delicate. Probably at home, he was dressed and undressed like a baby. He had finished at the College of Jurisprudence and had at first served in the Department of Justice. Then he was transferred to the Senate. He left that and through patronage had received the post in the Department of Crown Estates and had soon afterwards given that up. In my time, he was serving in Orlov's department. He was his head clerk, but he said that he should soon exchange into the Department of Justice again. He took his duties and his shifting about from one post to another with exceptional levity. And when people talked before him seriously of grades in the service, decorations, salaries, he smiled good-naturedly and repeated Prudkov's aphorism. It's only in the government service ye learn the truth. He had a little wife with a wrinkled face who was very jealous of him, and 5 weedy-looking children. He was unfaithful to his wife. He was only fond of his children when he saw them, and on the whole was rather indifferent to his family, and made fun of them. He and his family existed on credit, borrowing wherever they could at every opportunity, even from his superiors in the office and porters in people's houses. He was a flappy nature. He was so lazy that he did not care what became of himself, and drifted along heedless where or why he was going. He went where he was taken. If he was taken to some low haunt, he went. If wine was set before him, he drank that if it were not put before him. He abstained if wives were abused in his presence. He abused his wife, declaring she had ruined his life. When wives were praised, he praised his and said quite sincerely, I'm very fond of her. Poor thing. He had no fur coat and always wore a rug which smelt of the nursery. When at supper he rolled balls of bread and drank a great deal of red wine, absorbed in thought, strange to say. I used to feel almost certain that there was something in him of which perhaps he had a vague sense, though in the bustle and vulgarity of his daily life he had not time to understand and appreciate it. He played a little on the piano. Sometimes he would sit down at the piano, play a chord or two, and begin singing softly. What does the coming day bring to me? But at once, as though afraid, he would get up and walk from the piano. The visitors usually arrived about 10 o'clock. They played cards in Orlov's study, and Polya and I handed them tea. It was only on these occasions that I could gauge the full sweetness of a flunkey's life. Standing for 4 or 5 hours at the door, watching that no one's glass should be empty, changing the ashtrays, running to the table to pick up the chalk or a card when it was dropped. And above all, standing, waiting, being attentive, without venturing to speak, to cough, to smile, is harder. I assure you, is harder than the hardest of field labor. I have stood on watch at sea for 4 hours at a stretch on stormy winter nights, and to my thinking, it's an infinitely easier duty. They used to play cards till 2, sometimes till 3 o'clock at night, and then stretching, they would go into the dining room to supper. Or, as Orlov said, for a snack of something. At supper, there was conversation. It usually began by Orlov speaking with laughing eyes of some acquaintance, of some book he had lately been reading, of a new appointment or government scheme. Kukushkin, always ingratiating, would fall into his tone, and what followed was to me, in my mood at that time, a revolting exhibition. The irony of Orlov and his friends knew no bounds, and spared no one nothing. If they spoke of religion, it was with irony. I spoke of philosophy, of the significance and object of life's irony again. If anyone began about the peasantry, it was with irony. There is in Petersburg a species of men whose specialty it is to jeer at every aspect of life. They can't even pass by a starving man or a suicide without saying something vulgar. But Orlov and his friends did not jeer or make jokes. They talked ironically. They used to say that there was no God, and personality was completely lost at death. The immortals only existed in the French Academy. Real good did not and could not possibly exist, as its existence was conditional upon human perfection, which was a logical absurdity. Russia was a country as poor and dull as Persia. The intellectual class was hopeless. In Pekarsky's opinion, the overwhelming majority in it were incompetent persons, good for nothing. The people were drunken, lazy, foolish, and degenerate. We had no science. Our literature was uncouth. Our commerce rested on swindling. No selling without cheating. And everything was in that style. And everything was a subject for laughter. Towards the end of supper, the wine made them more good-humored, and they passed to more lively conversation. They laughed over Gruzin's family life, over Kukushkin's conquests, or at Pekarsky, who had, they said in his account book, one page headed charity and another physiological necessities. They said that no wife was faithful, but there was no wife from whom one could not, with practice, obtain caresses without leaving her drawing room while her husband was sitting in his study close by. That girls in their teens were perverted and knew everything. Orlov had preserved a letter of a schoolgirl of 14, and on her way home from school, she had hooked an officer on the Nevsky, who had, it appears, taken her home with him, and had only let her go late in the evening, and she hastened to write about this to her school friend, to share her joy with her. They maintained that there was not, and never had been, such a thing as moral purity, and that evidently it was unnecessary. Mankind had so far done very well without it. The harm done by so-called vice was undoubtedly exaggerated. Vices, which are punished by our legal code, had not prevented Diogenes from being a philosopher and a teacher. Chaucer and Cicero were profligates and at the same time great men. Cato, in his old age, married a young girl, and yet he was regarded as a great ascetic and a pillar of morality. At 3 or 4 o'clock, the party broke up, or they went off together out of town, or to Officer Street, to the house of a certain Varvara Osipovna. Well, I retired to my quarters and was kept awake a long while by coughing and headache. Chapter 22. 3 weeks after I entered Orlov's service, it was Sunday morning, I remember, somebody rang the bell. It was not yet 11, and Orlov was still asleep. I went to open the door. You can imagine my astonishment when I found a lady in a veil standing at the door on the landing. "Is Georgy Ivanitch up?" she asked. From her voice, I recognized Zinaida Fyodorovna, to whom I had taken letters in Znamensky Street. I don't remember whether I had time or self-possession to answer her. I was taken aback at seeing her. And indeed, she did not need my answer. In a flash, she had darted by me, and, filling the hall with the fragrance of her perfume, which I remember to this day, she went on, and her footsteps died away. For at least half an hour afterwards, I heard nothing. But again, someone rang. This time, it was a smartly dressed girl, who looked like a maid in a wealthy family, accompanied by our house porter. Both were out of breath, carrying 2 trunks and a dress basket. "These are for Zinaida Fyodorovna," said the girl. And she went down without saying another word. All this was mysterious and made Polya, who had a deep admiration for the pranks of her betters, smile slyly to herself. She looked as though she would like to say, "So that's what we're up to." And she walked about the whole time on tiptoe. At last we heard footsteps. Zinaida Fyodorovna came quickly into the hall, and seeing me at the door of my room, said, "Stepan, take Georgy Ivanitch his things." When I went in to Orlov with his clothes and his boots, he was sitting on the bed with his feet on the bearskin rug. There was an air of embarrassment about his whole figure. He did not notice me. The my menial opinion did not interest him. He was evidently perturbed and embarrassed before himself, before his inner eye. Dressed, washed, and used his combs and brushes silently and deliberately, as though allowing himself time to think over his position and to reflect. And even from his back, one could see he was troubled and dissatisfied with himself. They drank coffee together. Zinaida Fyodorovna poured out coffee for herself and for Orlov. Then she put her elbows on the table and laughed. "I still can't believe it," she said. "When one has been a long while on one's travels and reaches a hotel at last, it's difficult to believe that one hasn't to go on. It is pleasant to breathe freely." With the expression of a child who very much wants to be mischievous, she sighed with relief and laughed again. "You'll excuse me," said Orlov, nodding towards the coffee. "Reading at breakfast is a habit I can't get over. But I can do 2 things at once: read and listen. Read away. You shall keep your habits and your freedom." "But why do you look so solemn? Are you always like that in the morning, or is it only today? Aren't you glad?" "Yes, I am. But I must own I am a little overwhelmed." "Why?" "You had plenty of time to prepare yourself for my descent upon you. I've been threatening to come every day." "Yes, but I didn't expect you to carry out your threat today." "I didn't expect it myself, but that's all the better." "It's all the better. It's best to have an aching tooth out and have done with it." "Yes, of course." "Oh, my dear," she said, closing her eyes. "All is well that ends well." But before this happy ending, what suffering there has been. My laughing means nothing. I am glad, I am happy, but I feel more like crying than laughing. Yesterday, I had to fight a regular battle. She went on in French. God alone knows how wretched I was. But I laugh because I can't believe in it. I keep fancying that my sitting here drinking coffee with you is not real, but a dream. Then, still speaking French, she described how she had broken with her husband the day before, and her eyes were alternately full of tears and of laughter while she gazed with rapture at Orlov. She told him her husband had long suspected her, but had avoided explanations. They had frequent quarrels. And usually at the most heated moment, he would suddenly subside into silence and depart to his study for fear that in his exasperation he might give utterance to his suspicions, or she might herself begin to speak openly. And she had felt guilty, worthless, incapable of taking a bold and serious step. And that had made her hate herself and her husband more every day, and she had suffered the torments of hell. But the day before, when during a quarrel he had cried out in a tearful voice, "My God, when will it end?" and had walked off to his study, she had run after him like a cat after a mouse. And, preventing him from shutting the door, she had cried that she hated him with her whole soul. Then he let her come into the study, and she had told him everything, had confessed that she loved someone else, that someone else was her real, most lawful husband, and that she thought it her true duty to go away to him that very day, whatever might happen if she were to be shot for it. There's a very romantic streak in you, Orlov interrupted, keeping his eyes fixed on the newspaper. She laughed and went on talking without touching her coffee. Her cheeks glowed, and she was a little embarrassed by it, and she looked in confusion at Polya and me. From what she went on to say, I learned that her husband had answered her with threats, reproaches, and finally tears, and that it would have been more accurate to say that she and not he had been the attacking party. Yes, my dear, so long as I was worked up, everything went all right, she told Orlov. But as night came on, my spirits sank. You don't believe in God, George, but I do believe a little, and I fear retribution. God requires of us patience, magnanimity, self-sacrifice, and here I am, refusing to be patient and want to remodel my life to suit myself. Is that right? What if, from the point of view of God, it's wrong? At 2 o'clock in the night, my husband came to me and said, "You dare not go away. I'll fetch you back through the police and make a scandal." And soon afterwards, I saw him like a shadow at my door. Have mercy on me. Your elopement may injure me in the service. Those words had a coarse effect upon me and made me feel stiff all over. I felt as though the retribution were beginning already. I began crying and trembling with terror. I felt as though the ceiling would fall upon me. That I should be dragged off to the police station at once. That you would grow cold to me. All sorts of things. In fact, I thought I would go into a nunnery or become a nurse and give up all thought of happiness. But then I remembered that you loved me and that I had no right to dispose of myself without your knowledge. And everything in my mind is in a tangle. I was in despair and did not know what to do or think. But the sun rose and I grew happier. As soon as it was morning, I dashed off to you. Ah, what I've been to, Pier 1. I haven't slept for 2 nights. She was tired out and excited. She was sleepy, and at the same time, she wanted to talk endlessly, to laugh, and to cry, and to go to a restaurant to lunch that she might feel her freedom. You have a cozy flat, but I am afraid it may be small for the 2 of us, she said, walking rapidly through all the rooms when they had finished breakfast. What room will you give me? I like this one because it is next to your study. At 1 o'clock, she changed her dress in the room next to the study, which from that time she called hers. And she went off with Orlov to lunch. They dined too at a restaurant and spent the long interval between lunch and dinner and shopping. Till late at night, I was opening the door to messengers and errand boys from the shops. They bought, among other things, a splendid pier glass, a dressing table, a bedstead, and a gorgeous tea service, which we did not need. They bought a regular collection of copper saucepans, which we set in a row on the shelf in our cold, empty kitchen. As we were unpacking the tea service, Polya's eyes gleamed, and she looked at me 2 or 3 times with hatred and fear that I, not she, would be the first to steal one of these charming cups. A lady's writing table, very expensive and inconvenient, came too. It was evident that Zinaida Fyodorovna contemplated settling with us for good and meant to make the flat her home. She came back with Orlov between 9 and 10. Full of proud consciousness that she had done something bold and out of the common, passionately in love. And, as she imagined, passionately loved, exhausted, looking forward to a sweet sound sleep, Zinaida Fyodorovna was reveling in her new life. She squeezed her hands together in the excess of her joy, declared that everything was delightful, and swore that she would love Orlov forever. And these vows, and the naive, almost childish confidence that she too was deeply loved and would be loved forever, made her at least 5 years younger. She talked charming nonsense and laughed at herself. There's no other blessing greater than freedom. And those are, she said, forcing herself to say something serious and edifying. How absurd it is when you think of it. We attach no value to our own opinion, even when it is wise, but tremble before the opinion of all sorts of stupid people. Up to the last minute, I was afraid of what other people would say. But as soon as I followed my own instinct and made up my mind to go my own way, my eyes were opened. I overcame my silly fears, and now I am happy and wish everyone could be as happy. But her thoughts immediately took another turn, and she began talking on another flat of wallpapers, horses, a trip to Switzerland and Italy. Orlov was tired by the restaurants and the shops, and was still suffering from the same uneasiness that I had noticed in the morning. He smiled, but more from politeness than pleasure, and when she spoke of anything seriously, he agreed, ironically. Oh, yes. Step and make haste, and find us a good cook, she said to me. There's no need to be in a hurry over the kitchen arrangements, said Orlov, looking at me coldly. We must first move into another flat. We had never had cooking done at home, nor kept horses, because, as he said, he did not like disorder about him, and only put up with having Pralia and me in his flat from necessity. The so-called domestic hearth with its everyday joys and its petty cares offended his taste as vulgarity. To be with child, or to have children and talk about them, was bad form, like a petty bourgeois. And I began to feel very curious to see how these two creatures would get on together in one flat. Domestic and home-loving with her copper saucepans and her dreams of a good cook and horses. He fonded saying to his friends, but a decent and orderly man's flat bought, like a warship, to have nothing in it superfluous, no women, no children, no rags, no kitchen utensils. Chapter 23. Then I will tell you what happened the following Thursday. That day, Zinaida Fyodorovna dined at Contents, or Donitz. Orlov returned home alone, and Zinaida Fyodorovna, as I learnt afterwards, went to the Petersburg side to spend with her old governess the time visitors were with us. Orlov did not care to show her to his friends. I realized that at breakfast, when he began assuring her that for the sake of her peace of mind, it was essential to give up his Thursday evenings. As usual, the visitors arrived at almost the same time. Is your mistress at home too? Kukushkin asked me in a whisper. No, sir, I answered. He went in with a sly, oily look in his eyes, smiling mysteriously, rubbing his hands, which were cold from the frost. I have the honor to congratulate you, he said to Orlov, shaking all over with ingratiating, obsequious laughter. May you increase and multiply, like the cedars of Lebanon. The visitors went into the bedroom and were extremely jocose on the subject of a pair of feminine slippers, the rug that had been put down between the two beds, and a gray dressing jacket that hung at the foot of the bedstead. They were amused that the obstinate man who despised all the commonplace details of love had been caught in feminine snares in such a simple and ordinary way. He who pointed the finger of scorn is bowing the knee in homage, Pokushkin repeated several times. He had, and they say in parentheses, an unpleasant habit of adorning his conversation with texts in Church Slavonic. He said, as they went from the bedroom into the room next to the study. Shh. Here, Gretchen is dreaming of her Faust. He went off into a peal of laughter as though he had said something very amusing. I watched Gruzin, expecting that his musical soul would not endure this laughter, but I was mistaken. His thin, good-natured face beamed with pleasure. When they sat down to play cards, he, lisping and choking with laughter, said that dear George wanted to complete his domestic felicity was a cherry wood pipe and a guitar. Pekarsky laughed sedately, but from his serious expression one could see that Orlov's new love affair was distasteful to him. Can be prior to do the chick, but how about the husband? He asked in perplexity after they had played three rubbers. I don't know, answered Orlov. Pekarsky combed his big beard with his fingers and sank into thought. And he did not speak again till supper time. When they were seated at supper, he began deliberately, drawling every word. Altogether, excuse my saying so, I don't understand you. You might love each other and break the seventh commandment to your heart's content, that I understand. Yes, that's comprehensible. But why make the husband a party to your secrets? Was there any need for that? But does it make any difference? Pekarsky mused. Well, then let me tell you this, my friend. He went on, evidently thinking hard. If I ever marry again, and you take it into your head to seduce my wife, please do it, so that I don't notice it. It's much more honest to deceive a man than to break up his family life and injure his reputation. I understand. You both imagine, but in living together openly, you are doing something exceptionally honorable and advanced. But I can't agree with that. What shall I call it? Romantic attitude. Orlov made no reply. He was out of humor and disinclined to talk. Pekarsky, still perplexed, drummed on the table with his fingers, thought a little, and said, I don't understand you. All the same. You are not a student, and she is not a dressmaker. You are both of you people with means. I should have thought you might have arranged a separate flat for her. No, I couldn't. Read Turgenev. Why should I read him? I have read him already. Turgenev teaches us in his novels that every exalted, noble-minded girl should follow the man she loves to the ends of the earth. And should serve his idea, said Orlov, screwing up his eyes ironically. The ends of the earth are poetic license the earth, and all its ends can be reduced to the flat of the man she loves. And so, not to live in the same flat with the woman who loves you is to deny her exalted vocation and to refuse to share her ideals. Yes, my dear fellow, Tarnav wrote, and I have to suffer for it. What Turgenev has got to do with it, I don't understand, said Grison softly. And he shrugged his shoulders. Do you remember, George, how in 3 meetings he is walking late in the evening somewhere in Italy and suddenly hears Vieni, pensando a me, segretamente, Grison hummed. It's fine. But she hasn't come to settle with you by force, said Pekarsky. It was your own wish. What next? Far from wishing it, I never imagined that this would ever happen. When she said she was coming to live with me, I thought it was a charming joke on her part. Everybody laughed. I couldn't have wished for such a thing, said Orlov in the tone of a man compelled to justify himself. I am not a Turgenev hero, and if I ever wanted to free Bulgaria, I shouldn't need a lady's company. I look upon love primarily as a necessity of my physical nature, degrading and antagonistic to my spirit. It must either be satisfied with discretion or renounced altogether. Otherwise, it will bring into one's life elements as unclean as itself. For it to be an enjoyment and not a torment, I will try to make it beautiful and to surround it with a mass of illusions. I should never go and see a woman unless I were sure beforehand that she would be beautiful and fascinating. And I should never go unless I were in the mood. And it's only in that way that we have succeed in deceiving one another and fancying that we are in love and happy. But can I wish for copper saucepans and untidy hair, or like to be seeing myself when I'm unwashed or out of humor? I know Zinaida Fyodorovna, in the simplicity of her heart, wants me to love what I have been shunning all my life. She wants my flat to smell of cooking and washing up. She wants all the fuss of moving into another flat, of driving about with her own horses. She wants to count over my linen and to look after my health. She wants to meddle in my personal life at every instant and to watch over every step. And at the same time, she assures me genuinely, but my habits and my freedom will be untouched. She's persuaded that, like a young couple, we shall very soon go for a honeymoon, that is. She wants to be with me all the time in trains and hotels, while I like to read on the journey and cannot endure talking in trains. You should give her a talking to, said Pekarsky. What? Do you suppose she would understand he? Why we think so differently. In her opinion, to leave one's papa and mama or one's husband for the sake of the man one loves is the height of civic virtue. While I look upon it as childish, To fall in love and run away with a man to her means beginning a new life, while to my mind, it means nothing at all. Love and man constitute the chief interest of her life. And possibly it is the philosophy of the unconscious at work in her. Try and make her believe that love is only a simple physical need, like the need of food or clothes. That it doesn't mean the end of the world if wives and husbands are unsatisfactory, that a man may be a profligate and a libertine, and yet a man of honor and a genius, and that, on the other hand, one may abstain from the pleasures of love and at the same time be a stupid, vicious animal. The civilized man of today, even among the lower classes, for instance, the French workman spends 10 sous on dinner, 5 sous on his wine, and 5 or 10 sous on woman, and devotes his brain and nerves entirely to his work. But Zinaida Fyodorovna assigns to love not so many sous, but her whole soul. I might give her a talking to, but she would raise a wail in answer and declare in all sincerity that I have ruined her, that she had nothing left to live for. Don't say anything to her, said Pekarsky, but simply take a separate flat for her, that's all. That's easy to say. There was a brief silence. But she is charming, said Kukushkin. She is exquisite. Such women imagine that they will be in love forever and abandon themselves with tragic intensity. But one must keep a head on one's shoulders, said Orlov. One must be reasonable. All experience gained from everyday life and handed down in innumerable novels and plays uniformly confirms the fact that adultery and cohabitation of any sort between decent people never lasts longer than 2, or at most 3 years. However great the love may have been at the beginning, that she ought to know. And so all this business of moving, of saucepans, hopes of eternal love and harmony, on nothing but a desire to delude herself and me. She is charming and exquisite. Who demands it? But she has turned my life upside down. What I have regarded as trivial and nonsensical is till now she has forced me to raise to the level of a serious problem. I serve an idol whom I have never looked upon as God. She is charming, exquisite. But for some reason, now when I am going home, I feel uneasy, as though I expected to meet with something inconvenient at home, such as workmen pulling the stove to pieces and blocking up the place with heaps of bricks. In fact, I am no longer giving up to love a sous, the part of my peace of mind and my nerves. And that's bad. And she doesn't hear this villain, sighed Kukushkin. My dear sir, he said theatrically, I will relieve you from the burdensome obligation to love that adorable creature. I will wrest Zinaida Fyodorovna from you. You may, said Orlov carelessly. For half a minute, Dikushkin laughed. A shrill little laugh, shaking all over. Then he said, "Look out. I am in earnest. Don't you play the Othello afterwards?" They all began talking of Kukushkin's indefatigable energy in love affairs, how irresistible he was to women, and what a danger he was to husbands, and how the devil would roast him in the other world for his immorality in this. He screwed up his eyes and remained silent, and when the names of ladies of their acquaintance were mentioned, he held up his little finger as though to say they mustn't give away other people's secrets. Orla suddenly looked at his watch. His friends understood and began to take their leave. I remember that Gruzin, who was a little drunk, was wearisomely long in getting off. He put on his coat, which was cut like children's coats in poor families, pulled up the collar, and began telling some long-winded story then. Seeing he was not listened to, he flung the rug that smelt of the nursery over one shoulder, and with a guilty and imploring face, begged me to find his hat. "George, my angel," he said tenderly, "do as I ask you, dear boy. Come out of town with us. You can go, but I can't. I am in the position of a married man. Now, she is a dear, she won't be angry. My dear chief, come along. It's glorious weather. There's snow and frost. Upon my word, you want shaking up a bit. You are out of humor. I don't know what the devil is the matter with you." Orlov stretched, yawned, and looked at Pekarsky. "Are you going?" He said, hesitating. "I don't know. Perhaps. Shall I get drunk?" "All right. I'll come," said Orlov after some hesitation. "Wait a minute. I'll get some money." He went into the study, and Gruzin slouched in too, dragging his rug after him. A minute later, both came back into the hall. Gruzin, a little drunk and very pleased, was crumpling a 10-ruble note in his hands. "We'll settle up tomorrow," he said. "And she is kind. She won't be cross. She is my Wazochka's godmother. I'm fond of her. Poor thing. Ah, my dear fellow." He laughed joyfully, and pressing his forehead on Prikorsky's back. "Ah, Pekarsky, my dear soul! Avokatsinus is dry as a biscuit, but you bet he is fond of women." "Fat one," said Orlov, putting on his fur coat. "But let us get off, or we shall be meeting her on the doorstep." "Vieni pensando a me segretamente," amid Gruzin. At last they drove off. Orlov did not sleep at home and returned next day of dinner time. Chapter 24. Zinaida Fyodorovna had lost her gold watch, a present from her father. This loss surprised and alarmed her. She spent half a day going through the rooms looking helplessly on all the tables and on all the windows. But the watch had disappeared completely. Only 3 days afterwards, Zinaida Fyodorovna, on coming in, left her purse in the hall. Luckily for me, on that occasion it was not I, but Polya who helped her off with her coat. When the purse was missed, it could not be found in the hall. Strange, said Zinaida Fyodorovna, in bewilderment. I distinctly remember taking it out of my pocket to pay the cabman, and then I put it here near the looking glass. It's very odd. I had not stolen it, but I felt as though I had stolen it and had been caught in the theft. Tears actually came into my eyes. When they were seated at dinner, Zinaida Fyodorovna said to Orlov in French, "There seem to be spirits in the flat." I lost my purse in the hall today. And now, lo and behold, it is on my table. But it's not quite a disinterested trick of the spirits. They took out a gold coin and 20 rubles in notes. You are always losing something. First, it's your watch, and then it's your money, said Orlov. Why is it nothing of the sort ever happens to you? A minute later, Zinaida Fyodorovna had forgotten the trick played by the spirits, and was telling with a laugh how the week before she had ordered some notepaper and had forgotten to give her new address. And the shop had sent the paper to her old home at her husband's, who had to pay 12 rubles for it. And suddenly she turned her eyes on Polya and looked at her intently. She blushed as she did so, and was so confused that she began talking of something else. When I took in the coffee to the study, Orlov was standing with his back to the fire, and she was sitting in an armchair facing him. I am not in a bad temper at all, she was saying in French. But I have been putting things together, and now I see it clearly. I can give you the day and the hour, and she stole my watch. And the purse, there can be no doubt about it. Oh, she laughed as she took the coffee from me. Now I understand why I'm always losing my handkerchiefs and gloves. Whatever you say, I shall dismiss the magpie tomorrow and send Stepan for my Sofia. She was not a thief and has not got such a repulsive appearance. You are out of humor. Tomorrow you will feel differently and will realize that you can't discharge people simply because you suspect them. It's not suspicion, it's certainty, said Zinaida Fyodorovna. So long as I suspected that unhappy-faced, poor-looking valet of yours, I said nothing. It's too bad of you not to believe me, George. If we think differently about anything, it doesn't follow that I don't believe you. You may be right, said Orlov, turning round and flinging his cigarette end into the fire, that there is no need to be excited about it anyway. In fact, I must say, I never expected my humble establishment would cause you so much serious worry and agitation. You've lost a gold coin. Never mind, you may have 100 of mine. But to change my habits, to pick up a new housemaid, to wait till she is used to the place, all that's a tedious, tiring business, and does not suit me. Our present maid certainly is fat, and has, perhaps, a weakness for gloves and handkerchiefs. But she is perfectly well-behaved, well-trained, and does not shriek when Gerkrishking pinches her. You mean that you can't part with her? I didn't say so. Are you jealous? Yes, I am, said Zinaida Fyodorovna decidedly. Thank you. Yes, I am jealous, she repeated, and tears glistened in her eyes. No, it's something worse which I find it difficult to find a name for. She pressed her hands on her temples and went on in, you men are so disgusting. It's horrible. I see nothing horrible about it. I've not seen it. I don't know. But they say that you men begin with housemaids as boys and get so used to it that you feel no repugnance. I don't know. I don't know, but I have actually read. George, of course you were right, she said, going up to Orlov and changing to a caressing and imploring tone. I really am out of humor today. But you must understand, I can't help it. She disgusts me, and I'm afraid of her. It makes me miserable to see her. Surely you can rise above such paltriness, said Orlov, shrugging his shoulders in perplexity and walking away from the fire. Nothing could be simpler. Take no notice of her. And then she won't disgust you, and you won't need to make a regular tragedy out of a trifle. I went out of the study, and I don't know what answer Orlov received. Whatever it was, Polya remained. After that, Zinaida Fyodorovna never applied to her for anything and evidently tried to dispense with her services. When Polya handed her anything, or even passed by her, jingling her bangle and rustling her skirts, she shuddered. I believe that if Gruzin or Pekarsky had asked Orlov to dismiss Polya, he would have done so, without the slightest hesitation, without troubling about any explanations. He was easily persuaded, like all indifferent people, that in his relations with Zinaida Fyodorovna, he displayed for some reason. Even in trifles, an obstinacy, which sometimes was almost irrational. I knew beforehand that if Zinaida Fyodorovna liked anything, it would be certain not to please Orlov. When on coming in from shopping, she made haste to show him with pride some new purchase. He would glance at it and say coldly that the more unnecessary objects they had in the flat, the less airy it would be. It sometimes happened that after putting on his dress clothes to go out somewhere, and after saying goodbye to Zinaida Fyodorovna, he would suddenly change his mind and remain at home from sheer perversity. I used to think that he remained at home then simply in order to feel injured. "Why are you staying?" said Zinaida Fyodorovna, with a show of vexation, though at the same time she was radiant with delight. "Why do you? You are not accustomed to spending your evenings at home, and I don't want you to alter your habits on my account. Do go out as usual, if you don't want me to feel guilty." "No one is blaming you," said Orlov. With the air of a victim, he stretched himself in his easy chair in the study, and shading his eyes with his hand, took up a book. But soon the book dropped from his hand. He turned heavily in his chair, and again screened his eyes as though from the sun. Now he felt annoyed that he had not gone out. "May I come in?" Zinaida Fyodorovna would say, coming irresolutely into the study. "Are you reading?" I felt dull by myself, and had come just for a minute to have a peep at you. I remember one evening she went in like that, irresolutely and inappropriately, and sank on the rug at Orlov's feet. And from her soft, timid movements, one could see that she did not understand his mood, and was afraid. "You are always reading," she said, cajolingly, evidently wishing to flatter him. "Do you know, George, what is one of the secrets of your success? You are very clever and well read." "What book have you there?" Orlov answered. A silence followed for some minutes, which seemed to me very long. I was standing in the drawing room, from which I could watch them, and was afraid of coughing. "And there's something I wanted to tell you," said Zina Fyodorov, and she laughed. "Shall I?" "Very likely you'll laugh, and say that I flatter myself. You know, I want horribly to believe that you were staying at home tonight for my sake, that we might spend the evening together." "Yes." "May I think so?" "Do," he said, screening his eyes. "A really happy man is he who thinks not only of what is, but of what is not." That was a long sentence, which I did not quite understand. "You mean happy? People live in their imagination." "Yes, that's true. I love to sit in your study in the evening and let my thoughts carry me far, far away. It's pleasant sometimes to dream." "Let us dream aloud, George." "I've never been at a girls' boarding school. I never learned the art." "You're out of humor?" said Zinaida Fyodorovna, taking Orlov's hand. "Tell me why." "When you are like that, I'm afraid. I don't know whether your head aches or whether you are angry with me." Again there was a silence lasting several long minutes. "Why have you changed?" she said softly. "Why are you never so tender or so gay as you used to be at Zamensky Street?" "I've been with you almost a month, but it seems to me as though we had not yet begun to live." and have not yet talked of anything, as we ought to. You always answer me with jokes, or else with a long, cold lecture, like a teacher. And there is something cold in your jokes. Why? Have you given up talking to me seriously? I always talk seriously. Well then, let us talk. For God's sake, George. Shall we? Certainly. But about what? Let us talk of our life, of our future, said Zinaida Fyodorovna dreamily. I keep making plans for a life. Plans and plans. I enjoy doing it. So? George, I'll begin with the question. When are you going to give up your post? What for? But he asked Orlov, taking his hand from his forehead. With your views, you cannot remain in the service. You are out of place there. My views, Orlov repeated. My views? In conviction and temperament, I am an ordinary official, one of Shkedrin's heroes. You take me for something different. I venture to assure you. Joking again, George? Not in the least. The service does not satisfy me, perhaps. But anyway, it is better for me than anything else. I am used to it. And in it, I meet men of my own sort. I am in my place there and find it tolerable. You hate the service and it revolts you. Indeed, if I resign my post, take to dreaming aloud and letting myself be carried away into another world, do you suppose that that world would be less hateful to me than the service? You are ready to libel yourself in order to contradict me. Zinaida Fyodorovna was offended and got up. I'm sorry, I began this talk. Why are you angry? I am not angry with you for not being an official. Everyone lives as he likes best. Why do you live as you like best? Are you free to spend your life writing documents that are opposed to your own ideas? Zinaida Fyodorovna went on, clasping her hands in despair. To submit to authority, congratulate your superiors at the new year. And then cards, and nothing but cards. Worst of all, to be working for a system which must be distasteful to you. No, George. No. You should not make such horrid jokes. It's dreadful. You are a man of ideas, and you ought to be working for your ideas and nothing else. Really take me for quite a different person from what I am, sighed Orlov. Say simply that you don't want to talk to me. You dislike me, that's all, said Zinaida Fyodorovna through her tears. Look here, my dear, said Orlov admonishingly, sitting up in his chair. What it means, man, you are pleased to observe yourself that I am a clever, well-read man, and to teach one who knows does nothing but harm. I know very well all the ideas. Great, and he's small. Which you mean when you call me a man of ideas. So, if I prefer the service and cards to those ideas, you may be sure I have good grounds for it. That's one thing. Secondly, you have, so far as I know, never been in the service and can only have drawn your ideas of government service from anecdotes and on indifferent novels. So it would not be amiss for us to make a compact, once for all, not to talk of things we know already, or of things about which we are not competent to speak. Why do you speak to me like that? Said Zenaida Theodorevna, stepping back as though in horror. What for? George, for God's sake, think what you are saying. Her voice quivered and broke. She was evidently trying to restrain her tears, but she suddenly broke into sobs. George, my darling, I am perishing. She said in French, dropping down before Orlov and laying her head on his knees. I am miserable. I am exhausted. I can't bear it. I can't bear it. In my childhood, my hateful, depraved stepmother, then my husband, now you. You. You meet my mad love with coldness and irony, and that horrible, insolent servant. She went on sobbing. Yes, yes, I see. I am not your wife nor your friend, but a woman you don't respect, because she has become your mistress. I shall kill myself. I had not expected that her words and her tears would make such an impression on Orloff. He flushed, moved uneasily in his chair, and instead of irony, water. His face wore a look of stupid, school-boyish dismay. My darling, you misunderstood me, you muttered helplessly, touching her hair and her shoulders. Forgive me, I entreat you. I was unjust and I hate myself. I insult you with my whining and complaints. You are a true, generous, rare man. I am conscious of it every minute. But I've been horribly depressed for the last few days. Zinaida Fyodorovna impulsively embraced Orlov and kissed him on the cheek. Only please don't cry, he said. No, no. I've had my cry, and now I am better. As for the servant, she shall be gone tomorrow, he said, still moving uneasily in his chair. No, she must stay, George. Do you hear? I am not afraid of her now. One must rise above trifles and not imagine silly things. You are right. You are a wonderful, rare person. She soon left off crying. With tears glistening on her eyelashes. Sitting on Orlov's knee, she told him in a low voice something touching. Something like a reminiscence of childhood and youth. She stroked his face, kissed him, and carefully examined his hands with the rings on them and the charms on his watch chain. She was carried away by what she was saying, and by being near the man she loved, and probably because her tears had cleared and refreshed her soul. There was a note of wonderful candor and sincerity in her voice. And Orlov played with her chestnut hair and kissed her hands, noiselessly pressing them to his lips. Then they had tea in the study, and Seneda Fyodorovna read aloud some letters. Soon after midnight, they went to bed. I had a fearful pain in my side that night, and I could not get warm or go to sleep till morning. I could hear Orlov go from the bedroom into his study. After sitting there about an hour, he rang the bell. In my pain and exhaustion, I forgot all the rules and conventions and went to his study in my night attire, barefooted. Miss Orlov, in his dressing gown and cap, was standing in the doorway, waiting for me. When you are sent for, you should come dressed, he said sternly. Bring some fresh candles. I was about to apologize, but suddenly broke into a violent cough and clutched at the side of the door to save myself from falling. Are you ill? Said Orlov. I believe it was the first time of our acquaintance that he addressed me not in the singular. Goodness knows why. Most likely in my night clothes and with my face distorted by coughing. I played my part poorly and was very little like a flunky. If you are ill, why do you take a place? He said. That I may not die of starvation, I answered. How disgusting it all is, really. He said softly, going up to his table, while hurriedly getting into my coat. I'd put up and lighted fresh candles. He was sitting at the table with feet stretched out on a low chair, cutting a book. I left him deeply engrossed, and the book did not drop out of his hands as it had done in the evening.